Arrivé. The day of glory has arrived. Hello, I'm Peter Weller. I learned the Marseillaise, perhaps the world's most passionate national anthem, about 15 years ago when I decided to take some time off and come here to the streets of Paris and retrace the steps of the French Revolution. But the immediate legacy of the French Revolution was by no means days of glory. It was a reign of reactionary terror that left France in political chaos, with headless corpses, and eventually brought on Napoleon. Democracy was to come later. But just as the foundations of democracy are bathed in blood, so are they also bathed in beauty. And the glory and beauty of France endure in its invention, innovation, in the arts and sciences, in its civil planning and architecture, and in its incomparable facility to build, like a cathedral. The word cathedral does not just infer some big old church, generically. It's taken from the word cathedra, meaning seat. It is the seat of the bishop or the archbishop, the pope's representative in a particular parish or district. This is the Cathedral of Paris, Notre Dame de Paris, Our Lady of Paris, dedicated to the Virgin Mary. It ain't bad, is it? Matter of fact, it's probably the world's most famous church. Now, before this, in the early Middle Ages, churches were built in a style called Romanesque, using elements of real ancient Rome, like columns and capitals. Romanesque churches were short and fat and squatty, with big, thick walls, little bitty windows, barreled vaults, rounded arches. Even the Romanesque sculpture was austere and solid. But the churches didn't hold a lot of folks. And the Bishop of Paris, Maurice de Sully, not only wanted a church that would fill up with thousands, he wanted a church that would inspire awe.
De Sully was regarded as a Christian icon in France. After years of bloody fighting, he and Louis VII wanted to consolidate their control over the feudal lands of France. Their great cathedral would be the cornerstone of that new regime and a symbol of their awesome authority. It would be built in a way never before seen on Earth.
Maurice was the Bishop of Paris at a moment when Paris really was a boom town. Louis VII established Paris definitively as the capital of the Kingdom of France. I think Maurice wanted to build a building that was worthy of the status of the city and men of enormous wealth and power.
The 2 centuries, from the 1100s to the 1300s, that it took to build Notre Dame, from soup to nuts, is a period we call Gothic. But originally, Gothic was a disparaging term. Isn't that always the way when the next generations don't like anything that came before? Gothic falsely meant of the gods, or barbaric. But Gothic is majestic, with tall decorative spires and thin lancet windows and round rose windows and stained glass, and huge, massive piers inside, wide naves. When you think Gothic, think vertical.
The Gothic, one of its primary characteristics is the sense of both spaciousness and scale and extreme lightness, both structural lightness and then an interior filled with light filtering in through the stained glass windows. It presented a kind of new vision or new image of heaven to the worshiper.
Notre Dame would be the length of a football field, with walls towering 100 feet into the air. So big that it would engulf de Sully's old church, which continued to hold services during the early years of Notre Dame's construction. Scaffolding provided a framework for lifting heavy equipment and materials, wooden braces, and stonework for constructing the vaults. An ingenious man-powered wheel crane mounted at the top of the scaffolding was used to lift the heaviest material.
A man or two would have gotten in the wheel and essentially like a hamster hoisted the materials up.
To build the cathedral, thousands of workers would spend their entire lives erecting these walls.
Each mason seems to have had a mark which he would carve into the blocks so that they would get paid by the piece. One often has the romantic notion that each stone was a kind of carved prayer. But it was much more practical than that. If there was no money, there was no work.
So many thousands of tons of stone were needed that it started a craze called the cult of carts, wherein men, noblemen and commoners, would hook themselves to ox carts and pull the stone seeking absolution along the way. Now, as opposed to Rome in the Renaissance and even now, where architecture is deductive, that means it's thought out on paper according to mathematical proportions. Gothic architecture was additive. Some of these churches were just drawn in the dirt and then they went up. It's not to say that they didn't have a plan, but if they made a mistake, they added a pier or a wall or a pointed arch. Now, the thing with Notre Dame is that the weight of these stones, the downforce was so incredible. They also had the added problem of the wind because they were building up. Subsequently, they invoked this fantastic engineering element called the flying buttress. The flying buttress is this sort of half arch which displaces the weight out and then down. Notre Dame was so magnificent that it started a craze of Gothic building throughout Northern Europe, even before it was half finished.
In the past, builders with soaring ambitions had always been stymied by gravity. The crushing weight of a stone ceiling created too much outward stress on the walls. It may have even started out as an ingenious type of scaffolding to support the walls. But now, as architects scrawled out brilliant blueprints in the shadows of the rising structure, the solution of the flying buttress would become a design element for the ages. With this support, load-bearing walls could contain large cutouts for majestic windows that previously were impossible. The walls would have been too weak. By 1190, the south and north nave walls and lower vaults were erected. The western towers were also underway, rising independently to the height of the Great Western Rose Window, perhaps the most famous stained glass in the world. By 1196, in failing health, de Sully was determined to make Notre Dame Europe's most extraordinary cathedral, even if he wouldn't be around to see it.
Maurice de Sully, in his will, left money for the roof of the cathedral, and through his generosity left his mark on his beloved church.
The Cathedral of Notre Dame was finally completed in the mid-14th century, nearly 200 years after construction began. It was the symbol of an empire on the rise. Its grandeur and beauty was a harbinger of the power and glory to come. But first, the empire would be rocked to its foundations by a ruler who compared himself to a god, who encircled France in spectacular fortifications and constructed the largest palace the world has ever seen. The Neo-Gothic National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. has a piece of moon rock from Apollo 11 set into its southern stained glass window. 1648. France has a new ruling family, the House of Bourbon. The country has just emerged from centuries of bloody warfare and devastating bouts with the plague. The new king is just 9 years old. His name is Louis XIV. Louis begins his reign at a time when the nobles who had lost their bid for power won't let bygones be bygones. And with a young boy in control, they spy an opportunity. The nobles revolt, forcing young Louis and his family to flee into hiding. But the royal family regains control. And Louis vows he will never let anyone challenge his authority again. As the boy grew into a young man, his famous taste for the extravagant grew too, especially his massive construction projects. Unlike Notre Dame, a testament to God, Louis was determined to build a monument to himself. In a radical break with past kings, Louis takes absolute control by moving the seat of government out of Paris and setting it down in a small town 13 miles south called Versailles. In 1661, architects began work on a colossal complex that would be the nerve center of the empire.
Louis XIV wanted spectacular achievements. He wanted spectacular engineering, spectacular architecture. Versailles itself is a statement that says a lot about the kind of image he wanted to project to the world. You know, he wanted to be #1 power.
Versailles. It was here that the powdered wig and puff pastry were raised to high art. 700 rooms, 2,000 windows, 1,250 fireplaces, 1,800 acres of gardens, 1,400 working fountains. And not only did Louis call these magnificent digs home, he also called them office. Because if you're the king, you don't go to work. Work comes to you. After all, this is the dude who said, "L'État c'est moi." The state is me. And what better place to be the state than in a pad that's got an entire hallway made out of mirrors? Let me put it this way. If you were called on the carpet at Versailles, it was a pretty long carpet. By 1682, when Versailles was finished, it would have become the symbol of the power and the glory of the regime ancien.
His gardens and fountains were the most beautiful the world had ever seen. But they needed one thing: water. To solve this problem, Louis commissioned probably his most extraordinary feat of engineering: the Marly machine, an enormous pumping station to bring water from the Seine 3 miles upstream to his beloved fountains here. Inaugurated by Louis in 1684, the Marly machine was a miracle of hydraulic engineering. It was powered by the current of the Seine, flowing through 14 gigantic water wheels, capable of supplying 100 million gallons of water a day. In his mind, Louis now transcended mere mortality. He identified himself with Apollo, the Greek god of the sun, and adopted a new name, the Sun King. While Louis XIV was securing absolute power at home, he set his sights on the rest of Europe.
Louis XIV was an aggressor in a Europe that France was already the leading power.
To achieve his dream